The night air over the North Atlantic cut like a blade. Wind howled across steel decks, carrying the salt of endless waves. Somewhere in the dark, a merchant ship groaned as torpedoes ripped through her hull. The explosion lit the sea for a moment, fire spilling across the water. Dozens of men clung to debris, their shouts muffled by the roar of burning fuel. A U-boat slid away beneath the surface, engines humming, leaving destruction in its wake. It was the winter of 1942. In that year alone, nearly 8 million tons of Allied shipping would be sunk by German submarines. On some routes, losses reached 1 ship for every 3 that sailed. The Reich believed it was strangling Britain, cutting the arteries that carried food, oil, and weapons across the ocean. The numbers seemed impossible to overcome, and yet, within months, America answered with something equally impossible. Shipyards along the east and west coasts roared to life. Steel plates clanged, welders showered sparks, cranes swung sections into place. The United States began producing cargo ships faster than Germany could sink them. By war's end, 2,710 Liberty ships had been launched, enough to overwhelm the U-boats not with tactics alone, but with sheer mass. How did a nation build a fleet faster than an enemy could destroy it? How did factories and workers turn steel and sweat into the lifeline of victory? This is the story of the Liberty ship. By late 1940, even before America entered the war, Britain was desperate. German submarines prowled the Atlantic in wolf packs, sinking hundreds of merchant ships. Food shortages loomed. Supplies of oil and weapons shrank. Winston Churchill later admitted, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." U.S. National Archives, 1946. Without cargo ships, Britain could not survive. The United States, still neutral, recognized the danger. In September 1940, President Roosevelt announced an emergency shipbuilding program. The target was staggering: 200 cargo vessels built as quickly as possible. The design chosen was simple, almost crude. Based on a British plan, the EC2S-C1 was 441 feet long, powered by a triple expansion steam engine that produced 2,500 horsepower. Its top speed was only 11 knots, barely enough to keep up with a convoy. Critics called it a dime store ship, but the point was not elegance, it was numbers. The first Liberty ship was launched in September 1941. She was named the Patrick Henry, after the Revolutionary War orator. At her christening, Roosevelt declared, "She will bring liberty to Europe." The name stuck. Every vessel built under the program became known as a Liberty ship. The early months were chaotic. Workers were untrained, yards unprepared. Welding replaced riveting, saving time but introducing flaws. The first ships were late, expensive, and fragile. Some cracked in heavy seas. German propagandists mocked them as flimsy ships. But America's response was not to slow down. It was to accelerate. By 1942, the German campaign reached its peak. In the first half of that year, U-boats sank more than 3 million tons of Allied shipping. Off the American coast, tankers and freighters burned within sight of cities. Beaches glowed red at night from flames on the horizon. Newspapers called it the Second Battle of the Atlantic. German commanders boasted that they were winning the war without even setting foot on land. Yet something else was happening out of sight of the Atlantic battle. In shipyards from Maine to California, workers labored around the clock. Entire sections of Liberty ships were prefabricated miles away, shipped by rail, and lowered into place like giant Lego bricks. A vessel that once took a year to build could now be assembled in weeks. At Richmond, California, a yard launched a ship in just 4 days and 15 hours in 1942. The average production time fell to 42 days. The impossible began to look routine. The numbers again told the story. In 1941, 8 Liberty ships were completed. In 1942, 531. In 1943, 1,007. In 1944, 1,052. On some weeks, more ships left American slipways than U-boats could sink in months. German admirals watched their tonnage charts in disbelief. Every sunken freighter was replaced, sometimes 2 for every one lost. The sensory picture of American yards contrasted sharply with the silence of the Atlantic. The clang of hammers, the hiss of welders, the reek of paint and hot steel filled the air. Workers wore overalls, sparks dancing across their boots. Women took up torches and cranes, their hair tied back, their hands blistered. Many had never seen a ship before the war. Now they built one every few days. A German officer captured in 1944 admitted under interrogation, "We thought the sea would starve you. Instead, the sea fed you ships without end." Red Cross Report, 1945. That confession captured the paradox. The U-boat campaign had begun with triumph. It ended with futility, overwhelmed by American industry. The Liberty ship itself was no marvel. She was slow, noisy, and vulnerable. Her silhouette was easy to spot, her engine outdated. But she carried 9,000 tons of cargo, enough to supply a division for weeks. Some hauled tanks, others aircraft, others food and fuel. A few carried troops, stacked in bunks from deck to ceiling. Each voyage was a risk, but each voyage mattered. Together, they became the lifeline of the Allied war effort. By 1943, the tide began to turn. Allied escorts grew stronger, radar improved, and long-range aircraft closed the mid-Atlantic gap. But even as tactics shifted, the real weapon remained the shipyards. America was launching Liberty ships faster than submarines could sink them. For every convoy attacked, another sailed. For every U-boat victory, another Liberty hull slid down a ramp into the sea. By the end of the war, 2,110 Liberty ships had been built. Together, they carried 2/3 of all the cargo delivered to Allied forces overseas. They supplied Britain through its darkest hours, fed the Soviet Union through Arctic convoys, and sustained the invasions of Africa, Italy, and France. The U-boats never stopped fighting, but they lost the war of arithmetic. The first Liberty convoys crossed the Atlantic in late 1941 and early 1942. They were slow, ungainly, and easy targets. U-boats prowled the sea lanes, lurking beneath gray swells, waiting for the silhouettes of freighters against the horizon. When a convoy was sighted, the attack came quickly. Torpedoes hissed through the waves, striking with a hollow thud, then flame. Men scrambled into lifeboats, shouting against the roar of burning oil. In March 1942 alone, more than 500,000 tons of Allied shipping were lost. Tankers exploded off Cape Hatteras. Freighters were sunk within sight of New York and Miami. German crews called it the Second Happy Time. In their logs, U-boat captains wrote of hunting like wolves among sheep. They believed America had no defense, no fleet to replace what was going down. The Liberty ships were there too. Some went down on their maiden voyages. The Stephen Hopkins, armed only with a small deck gun, fought a running duel with a German raider in September 1942 before sinking, her crew firing until the deck was awash. Survivors floated for days before rescue. That battle became legend among American seamen, proof that even a cargo vessel could fight back. The German command underestimated what they were seeing. Admiral Karl Dönitz calculated that to win the war, his U-boats needed to sink 700,000 tons of shipping each month. In early 1942, they came close to that number. His staff reported confidently that Britain would collapse by year's end. What they did not know was that American shipyards were launching more than 600,000 tons of new shipping every month by late 1942. The losses, staggering though they were already being replaced. The sensory contrasts were striking. On the Atlantic, there was fear, smoke, and silence after explosions. Survivors clung to rafts, their lips salted and burned, the taste of oil coating their tongues. In the yards back home, there was noise without end, the clang of steel, the rumble of trains delivering plates, the glare of floodlights over midnight shifts. Workers smelled fresh paint, scorched metal, hot coffee carried in thermoses. For every freighter lost, another was already taking shape. A German captain captured in 1943 recalled his disbelief. "We sank them in the night, and yet by morning another came. We realized the factories were our true enemy." U.S. National Archives, 1946. His words reflected the growing awareness that the Atlantic battle was becoming less about tactics and more about arithmetic. Convoy battles reached a peak in 1942. and early 1943. Wolf packs of up to 40 U-boats attacked Allied formations. Liberty ships, plodding at 11 knots, were often stragglers, the weak links. Escorts fought desperately, depth charges rolling into the sea, explosions hammering the water. Sometimes the sea boiled with wreckage, splintered hulls, oil slicks, lifeboats adrift. The numbers of dead ran into tens of thousands, but each sinking revealed the same paradox. The more ships went down, the more were built. In 1942 alone, 531 Liberty ships were launched. In 1943, the figure doubled. The German Admiralty realized too late that the tempo was unsustainable for them, not for the Allies. "We fight the shipyards, not the ships," one Kriegsmarine officer admitted in a post-war interview, BBC Interview, 1962. The ethical question lingered even then. German propaganda described America's methods as war by factory, impersonal and inhuman. Allied leaders countered that survival demanded it. Geneva had no clauses for industrial output. Was it weaponizing industry, or simply the modern form of warfare? Historians still debate, but for the men in the water, the answer was simple. Without replacement ships, they would starve. By late 1942, the convoy system improved. Escort carriers brought air cover. Long-range Liberator bombers closed the mid-Atlantic gap. Radar and sonar improved detection, but the Liberty ships remained the lifeline. They carried tanks to North Africa, wheat to Britain, and munitions to Murmansk. Each voyage was a wager with fate. Each success was multiplied by the thousands of vessels that followed. The numbers turned steadily against Germany. In the first half of 1942, U-boats sank 3 million tons of shipping. In the second half, American yards produced nearly 4 million tons of new ships. The curve lines on German charts crossed, the moment when output surpassed destruction. The war of attrition had shifted, and the submarines could no longer win. In diaries found after the war, some German commanders confessed despair. One wrote in October 1942, "We cannot sink them fast enough. For every hull we destroy, 2 appear. The ocean itself seems endless with ships." U.S. National Archives, 1946. That was the turning point in perception. The U-boats had not failed tactically, but strategically. They could kill, but they could not outpace. By early 1943, the pattern was clear. Liberty ships, derided at first as clumsy, had become symbols of inexhaustibility. Convoys that once sailed with 20 vessels now had 50, then 80. German torpedoes struck, but the columns kept moving. Supplies reached London, Moscow, Cairo. The more they sailed, the more it became obvious. America was not only fighting with men, it was fighting with an idea that speed and volume could defeat precision and fear. By the spring of 1943, the Liberty ship program had transformed from an experiment into a machine of industrial war. Shipyards that had once struggled to launch a vessel in months now delivered them in weeks. At peak efficiency, one ship left the ways every 8 hours somewhere in America. It was a rhythm no submarine fleet could match. The scale was staggering. In 1941, only 8 Liberty ships had been completed. By the end of 1942, 531 had entered service. In 1943, that number doubled to 1,007. The average cost per vessel fell as production rose, a paradox of scale that made each ship cheaper the faster it was built. German intelligence officers intercepted reports and refused to believe them. "Such numbers are impossible," one noted in disbelief. U.S. National Archives, 1946. The sensory world of the yards was relentless. Sparks hissed as welders joined steel plates. Rivets hammered. Cranes groaned. Whistles blew across docks that never slept. Floodlights bathed the night in harsh white glow. Workers smelled hot oil and scorched paint. The metallic tang of newly cut steel, the steam of locomotives bringing fresh sections to the slipways. Break rooms echoed with clinking coffee cups and the chatter of men and women who knew they were outproducing an empire. Prefabrication was the secret. Instead of building hulls piece by piece, entire sections were constructed inland. Bow, stern, midships, and rolled by rail to assembly yards. There, Cranes lowered them into place like blocks. What had once taken a year could now be done in a month. In Richmond, California, the Kaiser Shipyards launched a Liberty ship in just 4 days, 15 hours. Though most launches took 40 to 50 days, even that seemed miraculous compared to pre-war standards. For the sailors who crewed them, the Liberty ship was both promise and peril. She was slow, topping out at 11 knots, vulnerable to torpedoes and bombs. Her welded hull sometimes cracked in icy waters, a design flaw that cost lives. Yet she carried 9,000 tons of cargo, enough to supply an army division for weeks. Some carried tanks, others aircraft, others wheat and fuel. Every voyage was a gamble, but every successful arrival meant survival for nations. The Germans noticed. Dönitz's staff tracked sinkings and replacements. By mid-1943, the curve lines crossed. Allied construction exceeded German destruction. In May alone, U-boats sank 43 ships. That same month, American yards launched 140 new ones. We are fighting, not convoys, but factories. One Kriegsmarine officer admitted in a report. Red Cross Report, 1945. The ethical capsule emerged in this realization. The Geneva Conventions had nothing to say about industrial capacity. Was America's ability to build ships faster than men could sink them an act of humane rescue, or a new kind of weapon? Historians debate this point still. Some call the Liberty ship a symbol of survival, others the embodiment of total war. The men who sailed in them saw no debate. To them, each steel hull was life itself. Convoys grew larger. Where once 20 ships crossed with a handful of escorts, now 80 to 100 sailed together, protected by destroyers, corvettes, and escort carriers. The Liberty ships formed the backbone of these massive trains. German U-boats tried to strike, but radar, sonar, and long-range aircraft made attacks costlier. Depth charges thundered into the sea. The hunters were becoming hunted. The sensory landscape of the Atlantic changed. In 1942, sailors had seen burning oil stretch for miles, the taste of salt and smoke in their mouths. By late 1943, they more often saw U-boats forced to surface, crews scrambling to abandon sinking hulls as Allied shells tore through conning towers. Survivors were pulled aboard Liberty ships themselves, the very vessels they had once tried to sink. Numbers illustrated the reversal. In the first half of 1943, U-boats lost 120 submarines. Convoy losses plummeted. By the end of the year, the Allies were losing less than 1 ship per 100 that sailed. Liberty ships continued to pour into service. The Reich had lost its window. The factories had closed it forever. One sailor later recalled, "We used to count the ships that went down. By 1943, we counted the ones that arrived, and there were always more." U.S. National Archives, 1946. His words captured the transformation. Fear turned into momentum, and momentum into inevitability. By the end of 1943, the Liberty ship was no longer just a vessel. It was a symbol of America's capacity to turn industry into strategy. German commanders had thought they were fighting men at sea. Instead, they were fighting women with welding torches in Portland, teenagers guiding cranes in Baltimore, immigrants riveting plates in New Orleans. The U-boat war had become a battle of societies, and in that battle, America's answer was clear: build faster than the enemy could kill. By early 1944, the Liberty ship was everywhere. Convoys stretched across the Atlantic like moving cities. Each carried not just cargo, but the promise that Britain would eat, Russia would fight, and invasion armies would one day cross the Channel. German commanders who once measured their success in tonnage sunk now measured their despair in the tonnage still afloat. The statistics defined the imbalance. In 1943 alone, America launched over 1,000 Liberty ships. Germany, in that same year, commissioned fewer than 300 new U-boats. At peak, U-boats prowled in packs of 40. At peak, Liberty convoys sailed with 100 ships guarded by dozens of escorts. The ratio no longer favored the hunter. It crushed him. The sensory world at sea reflected the change. In 1942, convoys had trembled with fear when radar blips appeared. By 1944, men watched U-boats hunted down by destroyers, the sea erupting with depth charges. The air smelled of cordite, tasted of salt spray. Sailors saw survivors hauled onto decks, shivering, defeated. They were no longer wolves, one British seaman recalled. They were prey. U.S. National Archives, 1946. Each Liberty ship was a warehouse afloat. She carried 9,000 tons. Trucks, tanks, locomotives, food or oil. Some carried aircraft packed wing to wing. Others hauled entire factories in crates. On deck, rows of jeeps gleamed under canvas. Below, steel drums of gasoline filled holds from floor to ceiling. A single voyage could refuel an entire Army corps. The vessels were slow, clumsy, even ugly, but they were indispensable. The Germans tried to adapt. New acoustic torpedoes were introduced. Radar detectors gave U-boats warning of patrol aircraft. But technology could not outrun scale. For every Liberty ship lost, 5 more were built. For every U-boat sunk, another gap opened in the line. Dönitz admitted privately to his staff, "The enemy has an ocean of ships. We cannot drain it." BBC interview, 1962. The ethics of such scale became a topic of debate. Was this war decided by courage at sea, or by cranes and welders ashore? Geneva had no articles about output measured in tons. Some historians argue the Liberty ship was not a weapon, but a supply line. Others counter that supply itself was the ultimate weapon. The sailors who sailed on them knew the truth. Without these vessels, there would have been no invasion, no liberation, no victory. On the Eastern Front, Soviet armies received American jeeps, trucks, and even locomotives aboard Liberty ships. In North Africa, Rommel's opponents were sustained by convoys that delivered fuel and food in quantities the Africa Corps could never match. And in Britain, warehouses filled to bursting in preparation for D-Day. Every bullet, every loaf of bread, every gallon of gasoline that crossed the Atlantic owed its passage to the Liberty ship. The sensory contrasts between nations grew starker. In Germany, rationing cut deep. Civilians lived on meager bread and ersatz coffee. In Britain, convoys brought sugar, meat, and grain. In the Soviet Union, lend-lease food and boots meant survival through another winter. The Liberty ship carried not just weapons but calories, warmth, and endurance. By mid-1944, German U-boat losses reached catastrophic levels. Nearly 40% of crews perished at sea. The hunters became the hunted, stalked by radar, sonar, and air patrols. Survivors who returned to base spoke in hushed tones of convoys too vast to attack. "We could sink one commander admitted under interrogation, but 10 more passed unharmed. Red Cross report, 1945. Meanwhile, America broke its own records. In 1944, 1,052 Liberty ships slid down the ways. Some yards launched 2 ships in a single day. At one point, more steel was consumed by shipbuilding than by tank production. Liberty ships became the face of total war, cheap, fast, and relentless. The clanging of hammers and the hiss of welders were as decisive as any artillery barrage. The numbers again spoke clearly. By the time of the Normandy invasion in June 1944, the Allies had a surplus of shipping. The Great Armada that crossed the Channel was carried in part by Liberty hulls, fuel for the Shermans, food for the infantry, ammunition for the guns, all crossed the ocean inside their steel holds. Without them, Operation Overlord would have been fantasy. With them, it was reality. One American admiral summed it up in a report, "Our fleet of cargo is the fleet that wins the war." U.S. National Archives, 1946. His words captured what every German general now understood. The Reich could no longer stop the flow. They could only watch as it grew. The Liberty ship was not a marvel of design. It was plain, slow, even derided as disposable. But that was its genius. America built them to be expendable, and in doing so made them unstoppable. They were the statistical sledgehammer that turned the tide of the Atlantic. By 1944, the question was no longer whether the Allies could outbuild the U-boats. The question was how long Germany could survive knowing they had already lost. By 1944, the Liberty ship was no longer just a freighter. It was a moving piece of infrastructure, a floating link in the chain that stretched from American factories to battlefields across 3 continents. Each vessel was simple in design but profound in purpose. Together, they rewrote the arithmetic of war. Technically, the Liberty ship was modest. At 441 feet long and 57 feet wide, powered by a triple-expansion steam engine, she produced 2,500 horsepower and reached 11 knots. By naval standards, she was sluggish, even primitive. But the engine was chosen because it could be built quickly, with parts already mass-produced. The hull was welded, not riveted, which reduced construction time. Prefabricated sections allowed entire yards to work simultaneously. What the ship lacked in speed, it made up for in numbers. The sensory reality of construction was industrial theater. Sparks showered from welders' torches, rivet guns echoed, cranes swung massive sections into place. Workers smelled burnt paint, fresh tar, and wet steel. The yards were alive 24 hours a day, floodlights turning night into day. The Liberty ship was less a vessel than a process, an assembly line on water. Her capacity defined her impact. Each Liberty could carry 9,000 tons of cargo. A single voyage might deliver 2,800 jeeps, or 440 tanks, or 230 million rounds of rifled ammunition. On other trips, she carried grain, medicine, or aviation fuel. Some were converted into troop transports, carrying up to 2,800 soldiers. Others became hospital ships, repair vessels, or even floating workshops. Every variant multiplied the value of the fleet. For the Germans, this adaptability was alarming. Donitz had imagined a static target, slow freighters easy to sink. Instead, the Liberty ship became a shape-shifting enemy. One convoy might carry tanks for North Africa, another, the rations that fed London, another, the oil that fueled bombers over Germany. We never knew which was the most dangerous cargo, one U-boat commander later admitted, but all of them meant death for us in the end. U.S. National Archives, 1946. The logistics network they fed was immense. In Britain, Liberty ships unloaded cargo into depots that sprawled for miles. From there, trains and trucks carried supplies to every front. The Red Ball Express, a truck convoy system in Europe, was fed almost entirely by Liberty cargoes. In the Soviet Union, Arctic convoys carried Liberty loads to Murmansk, despite ice, storms, and constant attack. In the Pacific, they hopped from island to island, building the ladder that led to Japan. The ethical capsule came into focus here. Was the Liberty ship a civilian vessel or a weapon? She carried no heavy guns, no armor, yet her cargo sustained armies, fueled bombers, and armed navies. The line between combatant and civilian blurred. Geneva Conventions protected merchant sailors, but total war left little distinction. Historians still argue, was the Liberty ship a lifeline or an arsenal afloat? Perhaps both. For sailors, the experience was vivid. On deck, the wind whipped across steel, salt stung lips, engines throbbed below, holds reeked of diesel, sweat, and canvas. At night, convoy lights were doused, leaving only the stars and the phosphorescent glow of waves. Men smoked quietly, listening for the distant boom of a torpedo. Every voyage was a gamble, but each arrival was triumph. Numbers revealed the gamble's stakes. By 1944, the average Liberty ship made 6 transatlantic crossings a year. Multiplied by 2,700 vessels, that equaled more than 15,000 voyages. Even with losses, hundreds of ships sunk. The net flow of cargo dwarfed German capacity to interdict. We sank them, yes, one Kriegsmarine officer admitted under interrogation, but the ocean never grew empty. Red Cross Report, 1945. The sensory contrast between the two sides widened. German submariners lived in cramped steel tubes, airfoul with diesel, skin slick with sweat. Rations were stale, the sea always present in taste and smell. Allied sailors aboard Liberty ships, though vulnerable, ate hot meals, had space to sleep, and saw the horizon. One side endured scarcity, the other abundance. It reflected the larger war itself. By late 1944, Liberty ships carried the materials for Operation Overlord, the invasion of France. They delivered everything from fuel drums to prefabricated bridges. Without them, the vast armada that stormed Normandy could not have been supplied. When Allied forces broke out of the beachhead, their advance was sustained by Liberty convoys unloading day after day at British ports. For the U-boats, the reality was crushing. Attacks that once crippled convoys now barely dented them. Liberty hulls filled the ocean. Escorts hunted submarines with radar, sonar, and aircraft. Losses of German crews soared. By the end of 1944, nearly 30,000 U-boat sailors were dead, a casualty rate of 75%. The hunters had become the most hunted men in the war. An American naval officer summed it up: "The Liberty ship was never beautiful, but she was victory in steel." U.S. National Archives, 1946. His words captured the paradox: a plain vessel that carried the weight of a continent's survival. The Germans once believed they could strangle Britain. Instead, they watched as a flood of steel and cargo washed their strategy away. The Liberty ship was not glamorous, but it was decisive. It was the vessel that proved industry itself could be a weapon of war. By 1943, the ocean itself seemed to change character. What had once been a hunting ground for U-boats became a gauntlet of steel, aircraft, and convoys too massive to break. German commanders recognized the shift. The figures no longer lied. The tonnage sunk fell sharply each month, while the tonnage launched rose beyond imagination. The Battle of the Atlantic, once Germany's war to win, had become Germany's war to lose. The statistics were devastating. In the first half of 1943, U-boats sank 2.7 million tons of Allied shipping. In the second half, the figure dropped below 700,000. At the same time, American yards launched more than 4 million tons of new shipping. By December, the ratio of loss to replacement was 4-1 in favor of the Allies. Dönitz, the architect of the U-boat fleet, confessed privately, "We are no longer masters of the Atlantic." U.S. National Archives, 1946. The sensory experience of convoy duty confirmed the numbers. In 1942, Liberty ship crews had watched helplessly as tankers burned on the horizon. By 1943, they saw U-boats forced to surface under relentless depth-charge barrages. Survivors crawled out of conning towers, choking in diesel fumes, hands raised in surrender. The taste of fear shifted from Allied crews to German ones. Technology aided the transformation. Radar-equipped escorts detected submarines before they could attack. HF-DF radio direction found wolf packs gathering. Long-range patrol bombers, B-24 Liberators, Sunderlands, Catalinas, closed the mid-Atlantic gap. Merchantmen themselves were armed with deck guns and anti-aircraft weapons. The U-boats, once hunters, became hunted from sea and sky. But the decisive factor was still the Liberty ship. For every vessel sunk, 5 more arrived. By the end of 1943, convoys contained 100 or more ships, carrying everything from wheat to locomotives. A single convoy could deliver more supplies than Germany sank in an entire month. The U-boats could not match that math. The ethical capsule of this period remains striking. Geneva Conventions had rules for the treatment of sailors cast adrift, but they said nothing about the industrial logic of replacing men with steel. Was victory measured in courage or in output? Historians disagree. Some argue that the Liberty ship was a triumph of democracy, built by ordinary citizens who ensured survival. Others say it marked the moment when war became less about combat and more about capacity. The reality in 1943 was clear. Without the factories, the front would have starved. German morale inside the U-boat fleet collapsed. Crews went to sea knowing their survival odds were shrinking. By 1944, the casualty rate for U-boat sailors reached nearly 75%. The air inside their steel tubes was heavy with diesel fumes, sweat, and fear. Food spoiled. Fresh water ran short. Each depth charge hammered the hull like a drum. The once proud wolf pack had become a graveyard of steel. Meanwhile, Liberty ships multiplied across oceans. In the Arctic, they carried supplies to Murmansk and Archangel through ice and storms. In the Mediterranean, they supported campaigns in Sicily and Italy. In the Pacific, they ferried Marines, Seabees, and cargo across vast distances. Their holds were universal. Grain, one voyage. tanks the next, bombs after that. They were not elegant, but they were everywhere. The sensory contrast between sides could not be sharper. Liberty crews felt the wind on open decks, heard the throb of steady engines, smelled hot food in mess halls. U-boat men endured darkness, stench, and silence, every sound a threat of death. One German survivor later admitted, "We drowned in steel and numbers, not in water." Red Cross Report, 1945. By mid-1944, the outcome of the Atlantic War was sealed. Allied losses had fallen to record lows. In July, only 20 ships were sunk across the entire Atlantic. That same month, American yards launched 140. Germany could no longer interdict, only harass. Convoys became symbols of inevitability, rolling highways across the ocean, too vast to stop. The numbers spoke with finality. Between 1939 and 1945, U-boats sank about 3,500 merchant ships. America alone built 2,010 Liberty ships, alongside thousands of other vessels. By war's end, the Allies had more shipping than they had started with. For Germany, it was the cruelest paradox. The more they destroyed, the more they guaranteed they would lose. An Allied sailor summed it up in one line: every time a Liberty ship sailed, Hitler lost. U.S. National Archives, 1946. His words carried the truth of a campaign where arithmetic mattered more than heroics. The Battle of the Atlantic had begun as a duel of hunters and hunted. By 1944, it was a production contest, and America had already won. By the spring of 1945, the Liberty ship had done more than survive the Atlantic. It had outlasted the U-boats, fed allies across the globe, and delivered the raw material of victory. Yet its true significance would be measured not only in wartime statistics, but in what followed. The Liberty ship became both a symbol and a foundation, a monument to industrial war and a bridge into the post-war world. The numbers remained staggering. In just 4 years, American yards had built 2,510 Liberty ships. Together, they carried 2/3 of all Allied cargo delivered overseas. More than 200 of them were sunk, some by torpedoes, some by mines, some by storms. But the fleet endured. By 1945, so many were in service that Allied planners spoke of tonnage surpluses. What began as desperation had ended in abundance. The sensory picture of ports in 1945 reflected this abundance. At Le Havre, cranes swung crates of food onto docks lined with civilians. In Antwerp, rows of jeeps gleamed in the sun, newly unloaded. In Murmansk, sailors stamped their boots against Arctic ice, while Liberty hulls steamed behind them, smoke trailing into the white sky. The world smelled of diesel, salt, and fresh cargo, evidence of survival carried across oceans. The economic impact was just as profound. Liberty ships created a generation of industrial workers trained in welding, engineering, and logistics. The prefabrication methods pioneered for them influenced post-war construction of bridges, highways, and even skyscrapers. The speed of assembly became a model for mass production far beyond shipyards. Kaiser's Shipyards in California proved that entire cities could be built around wartime industry and survive into peacetime as centers of commerce. For German generals reflecting after the war, the Liberty ship was an uncomfortable lesson. They had underestimated American capacity. Blitzkrieg had relied on speed and surprise, on breaking an opponent before numbers mattered. But against the Liberty ship, speed meant little. The convoys kept coming, their cargo turning into tanks, planes, and soldiers that overwhelmed every battlefield. "We did not lose to the ship," one officer admitted. "We lost to the yard that built her." U.S. National Archives, 1946. The ethical capsule also extended beyond war. Was the Liberty ship a tool of survival or a tool of total war? During the conflict, it blurred the line. It carried grain and medicine, but also bombs and ammunition. It saved lives and took them indirectly. After the war, some became hospital ships, others relief carriers bringing aid to starving nations. The same hull that had fed armies now fed civilians. Historians still ask, does this dual role redeem the vessel, or prove how completely war consumes the civilian? For sailors, the memory was more personal. Many recalled the rhythm of engines beneath their bunks, the creak of steel in heavy seas, the constant awareness of risk. Some voyages were uneventful, others terror-filled. Veterans spoke of the taste of salt-soaked coffee, the sound of depth charges thundering in the distance, the relief of sighting land. "The Liberty ship was our coffin and our cradle," one survivor said. Red Cross Report, 1945. Post-war, hundreds of Liberty ships continued to serve. They carried grain and relief missions to Europe under the Marshall Plan. They hauled refugees and raw materials. They became the workhorses of peacetime trade, just as they had been of wartime survival. Some remained active into the 1960s, rust-streaked but still afloat, their decks worn smooth by decades of cargo. The sensory contrast of these later years was stark. Where once sailors scanned horizons for periscopes, now they watched gulls circling above Mediterranean ports. Where holds once brimmed with ammunition, now they carried sacks of flour stamped with USA. The smell of gun oil gave way to the smell of wheat. The same holes that had defied U-boats now delivered peace. The numbers again underscored their legacy. By 1950, more than 1,500 Liberty ships were still in service worldwide. Some were sold to private companies. Others formed the core of reserve fleets. The United States kept hundreds mothballed, ready for crises. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, Liberty hulls carried troops and supplies once more. Their endurance proved as valuable as their speed of birth. German survivors of the U-boat fleet spoke of them with a kind of grim respect. "We could not stop them," one recalled. "They were like trees in a forest. You cut one, and 10 more stood." U.S. National Archives, 1946. For men who had once laughed at the flimsy ships, the memory of Liberty hulls filling the sea became proof of a war lost to scale. Strategically, the Liberty ship demonstrated that logistics could be as decisive as firepower. D-Day, the liberation of Europe, the advance into Germany, all depended on the cargo they carried. Without them, divisions would have starved, tanks would have halted, bombers would have stood idle. Their contribution was invisible to the battlefield, but vital to its outcome. In the broader history of war, the Liberty ship stands as a turning point. It embodied the industrialization of conflict, where victory depended on assembly lines as much as generals. It proved that mass production could neutralize tactical brilliance. It blurred the line between civilian and military effort, making every welder, every riveter, every crane operator part of the front. By the end of the 20th century, only a handful of Liberty ships remained afloat. Preserved as museums, their decks silent except for tourists' footsteps, they stood as reminders of the noise and fury of their birth. The smell of steel and paint lingered faintly in their holds. On plaques, numbers told their story. 2,710 built, 2/3 of Allied cargo carried, a war won by steel and labor. Their legacy is more than statistics. It is the proof that ordinary vessels, built by ordinary people, can change history. They did not win battles by firepower. They won them by endurance, by persistence, by the refusal to let the ocean close. And in doing so, they proved that America's greatest weapon was not a bomb or a gun, but the capacity to build faster than an enemy could destroy. The Atlantic is calm now. Liberty ships no longer steam in endless convoys, no wolf packs stalk beneath the waves, yet their story lingers in every lesson of modern war. They proved that strategy is more than battles. It is the sum of what a nation can build, deliver, and sustain. The paradox of the Liberty ship was always its simplicity. Critics sneered at its slow speed, its clumsy hull, its outdated engine, but that was the secret. America chose a vessel that could be built by the thousands, not admired by the few. In doing so, it rewrote the definition of strength. The Liberty ship was not designed to be the best. It was designed to be enough to flood oceans, enough to outlast submarines, enough to tip the balance. The numbers framed the legacy. 2,710 built, 9,000 tons of cargo each, a combined carrying power greater than all of Germany's merchant fleet at the start of the war. For every U-boat sunk, another convoy sailed. For every sailor lost, another voyage carried hope. The Liberty ship was arithmetic as destiny. German generals later admitted the truth. "We thought victory lay in the sea," one confessed in interrogation, but victory lay in the factories behind the sea. U.S. National Archives, 1946. The admission cut deeper than defeat. It acknowledged that power in the modern age was measured in cranes, welders, and workers who never saw a battlefield. The sensory echoes of that age still matter. The clang of hammers in Richmond, the hiss of welding torches in Baltimore, the smell of hot steel in Portland, the sight of ships sliding into the water every few days, champagne breaking against bows. Each sound, each smell, each image was part of the arsenal. The battlefield was not only Normandy or El Alamein, it was every dockyard that kept the sea lanes alive. Ethically, the Liberty ship raised questions that endure. Was it a civilian vessel, a lifeline of food and medicine, or was it a weapon, carrying bombs, tanks, and fuel to battlefields? Geneva Conventions did not answer. Historians still argue, perhaps the Liberty ship was both. It blurred the line between warfighter and civilian, making every welder a soldier of production, every rivet a bullet in an unseen battle. The meta-narrative is clear. Liberty ships taught that wars are not won solely by generals' maneuvers or soldiers' courage. They are won by nations that can supply, sustain, and outlast. In this sense, the Liberty ship is not only a relic of World War II, it is a warning and a lesson. In every future conflict, the question will not only be who fights best, but who builds longest. By 1945, the U-boats had sunk 3,500 merchant ships, but America had built 2,710 Liberty ships, plus thousands of tankers, escorts, and specialized craft. By war's end, Allied shipping capacity exceeded pre-war levels. It was a victory measured not in battles won but in oceans crossed. One sailor who served on Liberty convoys later said, "We didn't win glory, we won distance." Red Cross Report, 1945. His words carried the essence of the Liberty ship. Not dramatic, not elegant, but decisive. The final figure speaks louder than memory. By carrying 2/3 of all Allied cargo overseas, the Liberty ship ensured that 150 divisions were fed, armed, and supplied from 1942 to 1945. Without them, Britain might have starved. The Soviet Union might have fallen. The invasions of Africa, Italy, and France might have failed. With them, history turned. The Liberty ship's silhouette was not glamorous, but it was the shape of survival.